The showdown over the future of Venezuela continued today, both in Caracas and in Washington. Protesters answered a call to take to the streets from the man the Trump administration recognizes as the country's interim leader. And as Nick Schifrin reports, today's protests come amid an intense push by the United States to remove Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro.
On the streets of Venezuela's capital today, a revitalized opposition demanded freedom and expressed confidence they could change the future. Thousands of protesters filled Caracas, calling for President Nicolás Maduro's ouster. They braved physical threats to request new free elections and the transfer of power to National Assembly head Juan Guaidó. Today, Guaidó's supporters chanted that when he declared himself interim president last week, he brought back hope as he was mobbed with cameras.
We have begun to build a majority, winning international support like in Parliament by speaking out against human rights violations and corruption in Venezuela. During this time, we want to bring an end to this usurpation, bring in a transitional government, and free elections.
Since the latest round of protests began last week, human rights groups say at least 35 people have been killed by security forces. Today's demonstrations were smaller, but spread from areas that were once government strongholds to elite Caracas neighborhoods. New York Times reporter Ana Vanessa Herrero was there.
The opposition asked everyone to stop for 2 hours what they were doing. And for example, here it's a private hospital in the capital city, in the east side of the capital city. And we can see doctors, we can see nurses stopping their jobs, stopping their day-to-day life to protest against Nicolás Maduro. We want to ask the government to leave power, to open a path for transition.
Maduro relies on the military's support to stay in power. As seen on state TV today, he rallied troops and offered to meet with the opposition. But he also opposes U.S. influence and recorded a video message addressed to the American people.
I am appealing to your conscience. I'm appealing to your solidarity. I'm appealing for you to wake up to the truth. Let's not permit a Vietnam in Latin America. If the United States tries to intervene here, they will have a Vietnam that's worse than you can imagine.
But the U.S. is increasing its intervention. Today, President Trump had his first phone conversation with Guaidó. On Monday, National Security Advisor John Bolton spoke to White House reporters while holding a notepad suggesting the U.S. could deploy 5,000 troops to neighboring Colombia. And the U.S. is trying to redirect payments for Venezuelan oil, which account for 90% of the country's revenues, to Guaidó. Today, Guaidó's self-declared ambassador to the U.S., Carlos Vecchio, said that process had begun.
We want to start the process of recover them, to control them, correct? We want to do this, as I said before, progressively, orderly, and following legal procedures.
But Maduro has powerful allies. A Russian plane was spotted at the Caracas airport. Russia could help target Maduro's enemies and prop him up financially. Today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov urged Guaidó to accept international mediation.
We call on the opposition to display a similar constructive approach, reject ultimatums, and act independently, basing their decisions only on the interests of the Venezuelan people.
But many Venezuelan people argue their country has collapsed. Supermarket shelves are empty because there's been a shortage of food. Medical patients have protested a shortage of medicine. Children play in the dark because of a shortage of power, and inflation is more than 1,000,000%. The economic collapse has sparked the region's largest ever exodus. And now, led by a new popular opposition figure, demonstrators say they have nothing else to lose and vow to keep fighting. To examine the U.S.'s approach to Venezuela, we get two views. Benjamin Gedan was the South America director on the National Security Council staff during the Obama administration. He's now with the Woodrow Wilson Center. And Isaías Medina. He was a senior diplomat at the United Nations under Nicolás Maduro. He publicly resigned in 2017 in protest of human rights violations. Thank you very much to you both. Isaías Medina, let me start with you. This is one of the most aggressive attempts by the United States to change a government in Latin America in decades. Do you support it?
First of all, thank you, Nick, for having me in your program. Thanks, PBS, for their interest in the dire situation in my country. Not only I, but 30 million people support not only the U.S. circumstance, but also the Latin American initiative to restore the rule of law, democracy, and freedom in Venezuela.
Okay, so Benjamin Gedan, let me ask you about some specifics about what the U.S. has pursued. As we just discussed, trying to divert some of the money away from Nicolás Maduro on oil, which is about 90% of Venezuelan revenue, and also a lot of discussion from the National Security Advisor about possible use of troops or suggestions that there could be troops sent to Colombia. Do you support those two moves?
No, I think both those steps are problematic. I think the sense of urgency that the United States administration has shown is absolutely correct. The situation is tragic. It's heartbreaking, the lack of food and medicine in Venezuela. The question is, how can we assist the Venezuelan people, promote a peaceful transition in Venezuela without harming the people themselves or fracturing the coalition that we've built over 2 administrations?
So, Isaías Medina, let me drill into that a little bit. There are some fears that diverting the oil revenues will hurt the Venezuelan people themselves. You've already got 3.5 million refugees. Those numbers could go up, and a lot of talk of troops. And as Benjamin Gedan just said, risking the bipartisan consensus in Congress and also regional support, as you just mentioned. So do you have those same fears?
No, I actually believe that the forced displacement of 3.5 million refugees spillover into neighboring countries is actually because Maduro's regime has been oppressing. There is rampant violence. There is a humanitarian apocalypse that has been denied by the and caused, induced by Maduro's regime. And the targeted oil sanctions have been right on point, coordinated with President Guaidó, and will crush the financial boost from Maduro to keep harming the Venezuelan civilian population.
Benjamin Gedan, what's wrong with trying to crush Maduro's economy?
No, crushing the economy means crushing the Venezuelan people, potentially. I mean, I don't think this economy or these people can bear any more suffering. The fact that these refugees have left Venezuela and these migrants is certainly a sign that the situation is being poorly managed by the authorities, to say the least. The question, again, is how can you effect a transition there without worsening the migration crisis or the humanitarian crisis? And I'm not sure we have found the right tools by threatening an invasion or cutting off entirely the economic lifeblood of the economy.
Isaías Medina, National Security Advisor's reference to 5,000 troops in Colombia on his pad. He consistently says all options are on the table. Is that helpful?
Yes. You know why? Because this is a proxy failed state with at least 22,000 Cuban agents that have infiltrated the armed forces. They're running the show. And then we have also the financial clout of China with $65 billion in loans. And we have the military footprint of Russia with at least $12 billion in arms and weapons. So if we do not show our strength now, we will not be able to either offer a way out. It either can be a peaceful way out, or he will choose with his very violent anti-Western rhetoric. But what we have to look at here is that more than 500,000 Venezuelans have been silently exterminated by this humanitarian crisis, which has been induced to maintain the regime in power. So it is very important that we have a show of strength and that we can bring humanitarian aid as soon as possible. If it needs to be with military support, so be it. Venezuelans will welcome the troops from a coalition that will preserve the humanitarian aid with open arms.
Benjamin Gedan, how do you get that humanitarian aid into Venezuela if you don't have some kind of military backing behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you can do is provide humanitarian aid to the Venezuelans who've left. I think the United States has not been generous in that regard. The 3 million Venezuelans who have fled, half of them living in Colombia, could use U.S. support. There's been about $100 million the U.S. has committed. It needs to be a lot more generous. There needs to be protection for the Venezuelans in the United States who are seeking asylum. To get aid into Venezuela is nearly impossible. The government denies the humanitarian nightmare that it has created. I don't see any solution to that other than a peaceful transition of power in Venezuela.
Isaías Medina, I want to quickly get to you on the future. Will the military continue to support Nicolás Maduro? Quickly.
Well, first of all, we need to separate a distinction between what there are militaries and what are thugs that are involved in drug trafficking and links to terrorism and transnational organized crime and wearing a uniform. For example, just look at this. There are 1,000 generals in the armed forces of Venezuela for 100,000 troops. So honestly, I believe that right now, progressively and slowly, some soldiers and police and even dissidents have shown the support to President Guaido's government, but it's not enough. People are dying daily on basis of hundreds of people just from weaponization of starvation and medicine scarcity. So we will see progressive deterioration of the armed forces, but we need faster solutions to this huge humanitarian crisis.
Benjamin Gedan, will the military continue to support Maduro?
Look, I think Maduro is the get-out-of-jail-free card for members of the military that have been robbing Venezuela for years. I think they're going to stick with the government till the absolute last minute. I think some amount of amnesty is probably all that's needed when the moment comes that they decide that they've got a bad deck of cards.
Isaías Medina, Benjamin Gedan, thank you both.
Thank you.